the father of our scientific understanding of global warming. You have written about it persuasively since the early 1980s. Your rhetoric is getting more severe, more edge. Why? Explain to us the transition and what is happening and at what pace.
Well, everything is happening as we expected if we continue to increase greenhouse gases, but nothing is being done about it. The greenhouse gases are continuing to increase faster and faster.
To go back to the early studies that you promulgated, that you wrote when you testified in the early 80s before Congress, you predicted that there would be severe weather, there would be droughts, there would be floods, that there would be melt in the polar ice cap, all of the things that one by one we have now been able to see and document. Yeah. So you've been vindicated because there were many doubters, but you're getting more concerned for an obvious reason. Yeah. We're facing a crisis.
Well, yeah, it is a little more serious than we estimated then. The difficulty in getting the public to understand is because of the large natural variability of weather and climate. So I had decided in 1988 when I testified to try to make this clear by making up colored dice, where this die represented the climate that existed then. There were equal chances of unusually warm summers, unusually cool summers, and just typical or average ones.
To state the obvious, dice having 6 sides, 2 below normal, 2 above normal.
Right.
Random distribution, bell curve distribution, 2, 2, and 2.
And we used the climate models to say what it would be like by the beginning of this century. And we said it would be loaded dice with 4 sides red, 1 side blue, and 1 side white.
And the 4 red sides reflecting?
Yeah. Now, what's actually happened is about 4.5 sides red. But what I didn't think about then was the fact that if you're shifting this distribution of temperatures toward hotter and hotter values, then the tail of the hottest ones are going to be very extreme. And those are what we saw in Oklahoma and Texas last summer, in Moscow the year before, and in the Midwest this year. So one side of the dice really needs to be a special red. This is the wildfires, the extreme droughts.
And so what you're saying is that CO2 emissions have continued on the curve that you projected back in the early 1980s. Right. But the impact of that, with the accelerating pace of temperature increase, has been to shift the entire bell curve. And the tail of that curve is now the rather disastrous extreme weather events that we are witnessing.
That's right. And it's quite a change, because here's the bell curve that existed 50 years ago, a very symmetric curve.
And to bring it back to the dice, 2 blue, 2 white, 2 red in terms of distribution.
Right. And as we went along, 1980s, 1990s, this curve began to shift to the right. And these are observations. So there's no climate model involved here. These are the distribution of actual temperatures in the summer.
Right. That's what I want to make clear. These are numbers based upon unchallengeable scientific observations of temperature, increased temperature in our atmosphere and on the ground and in the ocean.
Precisely. And what you see is that this bell curve has shifted so far to the right that there's a significant number, about 10% of the time, or 10% of the area of the land, is covered by anomalies that are more than 3 standard deviations, which would have occurred only a couple tenths of a percent of the time 50 years ago. It's now about 10%.
Right, and that 10% is the danger zone.
Exactly. These kind of anomalies have huge economic impact.
To get even more technical, and I hate to do this sometimes on a TV show, but in terms of parts per million of CO2 that is now measurable, we have gone from where to where, and where will we end up if we don't do something dramatic?
Well, we started at 280 about 150 years ago, and it's now over 390. And if we keep going, it's increasing 2 ppm per year. So it will get up to 600 this century if we continue.
And when you hit 600, is there a tipping point in there beyond which there's a point of no return?
Well, we definitely should not go to 600. We're already close to tipping points. If we want to stabilize the climate at a level not much warmer than it is now, we need to begin to reduce emissions now, within the next few years.
Okay, but just to folks out there who say, okay, so we have a drought, the price of corn goes up a little bit, explain what the actual impact will be on life on this planet in terms of rising level of the ocean, in terms of the arability of the land mass in the United States, our capacity to grow food, species that will become extinct? What are the actual impacts, and when do we begin to see those moments?
Yeah, well, the ones that I worry about particularly are species is one thing, because if we continue with business as usual this century, we will drive to extinction 20 to 50% of the species on the planet.
Can I just stop you there? Look, I'm not a scientist. I know nothing about this stuff, but it does strike me that if that happens, the entire cycle of nature is thrown off in ways we can simply not understand.
Yeah, absolutely. We are pushing the system an order of magnitude faster than any natural changes of climate in the past.
Oceans will go up how much?
Well, that depends. But if Greenland and or West Antarctica goes unstable, we will get several meters of sea level rise.
Several meters meaning 15, 20 feet?
Yeah. It's debatable as to how long that will take to happen. But in my opinion, the amplifying feedbacks that occur once the ice sheets begin to melt and become darker are such that it would happen within a century.
And just to prove, I actually read your stuff. When the ice sheets melt, they then release more methane into the atmosphere, which then adds to the cycle, negative feedback loop that makes it even more dangerous.
It's the tundra and the continental shelves that have this methane hydrates that would melt and release
Make me feel good.
methane.
If I were a student and I gave you that answer, would I get at least a B?
Well, yeah, it was partly right.
Oh, man, you're hurting me. All right. Despite that, here's the question. What do we have to do? Time is short. What can we do, and what do we have to do in the near term?
Well, we're going to have to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and that is not as difficult as you think. If we would just make fossil fuels pay for their true cost to society, we could begin to move to different energies and energy efficiency. We should be collecting a fee from fossil fuel companies that gradually rises over time, and 100% of that money should be distributed to the public, not one dime to the government. If we did that, the people who do better than average in limiting their fossil fuel use will actually get more in this dividend than they would pay in increased energy prices.
The notion here is to make carbon-based fuels more expensive, but you return all the money, so you're subsidizing those energy sources that are not carbon-based.
Well, you're not subsidizing
comparatively.
anything.
Well, comparatively.
Well,
in terms
but
of
the problem we have now is we're subsidizing the fossil fuels directly, but also we're not making them pay for the damage they do to human health because of air and water pollution and to the climate, climate impacts.
Let me make 1 point, 2 points. One, all the data you've shown us is verifiable, accurate. It exactly matched the predictions you made back in the 1980s. Back then, these were predictions. Now they're certifiable facts. Second, the proposal that you have made of essentially a carbon tax return to the public is a conservative idea. It's based on old-fashioned market economics of making people pay for the cost of the pollution that they generate.
And it should come from conservative people once they understand the situation. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to reach a point where the government takes over, which is the last thing the conservatives want.
Am I correct that Glenn Hubbard, who was Mitt Romney's economic advisor, has endorsed this concept of carbon taxes as an tax on the externality of carbon pollution?
Yeah, there are a number of conservatives who have endorsed the idea.
I think it's fair to say, as somebody who has studied a bit of economics, it's impossible for anybody who understands economics not to endorse that concept.
I think that's right.